right, everyone. Thank you again so much for joining. This is Lindsay Riley with the Maryland Democratic Party. We are so excited today to be joined by former Attorney General Brian Frosh, Congressman Glenn Ivey, and then we have Senator Van Hollen and Congressman Jamie Raskin just making their way over. But out of respect for folks' times, we're going to get started. Attorney General Frosh, I'm going to kick things over to you. Thank you so much.
Hey, thank you, Lindsay, and it's a pleasure to be here. We're here to talk about Mitch McConnell's candidate for the United States Senate. And Larry Hogan has been talking a lot about how he stood up to Donald Trump. That's not what I remember. During Trump's first week in office, he issued his Muslim ban executive order. And I wrote to Governor Hogan and I asked permission to sue. I explained that the order was discriminatory. It was unconstitutional. It was just plain stupid. And Larry Hogan didn't respond at all. So I went to the General Assembly and I asked them to pass a bill authorizing the Attorney General's office to contest federal actions that were likely to hurt our state or our people. And that's authority that most attorneys general already have. Hogan opposed that bill vehemently, called it outrageous. Then Senator Jamie Raskin led the charge. It passed, and when it passed, it required me to write to the governor, explain the legal action that I intended to take, and it required him to respond to that letter and explain his position. We filed, to the best of my recollection, around 90 lawsuits, and Larry Hogan ignored my letters. He would not respond. We sued Trump not only for the second and third iterations of the Muslim ban, but we sued him several times because he was trying to kill the Affordable Care Act. We sued him when he tried to prohibit the Affordable Care Act insurance coverage for contraception. We sued him again when he tried to do that for family planning. We sued Trump when he tried to permit discrimination in healthcare based on race, religion, or LGBTQ plus folks. We sued him when Trump tried to allow premium billing for abortion care. We sued Trump when he tried to cut food benefits for poor people, SNAP benefits. We sued him when he tried to reduce protections for folks who were in danger of or actually exposed to toxic chemicals. We sued him when he reduced protections against air pollution and water pollution multiple different times. We sued him when he tried to allow the printing of 3D guns. We sued Trump when his administration took people's children away when they entered the country, and no one bothered to keep track of the children. So when we won the lawsuit, his administration couldn't find the parents to reunite them with their kids. And during this entire time, Larry Hogan didn't say boo. He would not respond to my letters. He just stood back in silence as Trump attacked Marylanders and their health care and our environment. The legislature mandated that the governor appropriate $1 million so my office could do its work. He was bitterly opposed to that. And despite the legal requirements, he just refused to do it. Please don't tell me that Larry Hogan is going to stand up to Donald Trump. The House was on fire for 4 years, and Larry Hogan did not so much as spit on the blaze. I don't believe he will do any better in the United States Senate. Sending him to give the Republicans the majority in the Senate, as Mitch McConnell hopes, is just flat out dangerous. And we've been joined by our great United States Senator, Chris Van Hollen, and I think he can give you a bigger picture of exactly how dangerous it is to allow Larry Hogan to join the MAGA crowd down in the U.S. Senate. Chris?
Well, thank you, Brian, and thank you for your service to our state as Attorney General, and for exposing the fact that Larry Hogan blocked or tried to block your efforts to hold the Trump administration accountable. Look, it's very clear. This is not rocket science, it's political science. And when you have what is effectively 50-50 in the United States Senate, in terms of the split between Republicans and Democrats, very simple political math tells you that a vote for Larry Hogan is a vote to put Mitch McConnell and Ted Cruz and the MAGA Republicans in charge of the United States Senate. That's why Mitch McConnell recruited Larry Hogan. He worked to get Larry Hogan into this race. I mean, people may remember Larry Hogan saying he didn't want to be in the United States Senate. Well, Mitch McConnell went to work and he called Larry Hogan his, quote, best recruit of the year, right? This is Mitch McConnell saying that Larry Hogan was his best recruit of the year. And why would Mitch McConnell do that? This is not out of the goodness of his heart. This is to put Mitch McConnell and Ted Cruz and Lindsey Graham and the Republicans in charge of the United States Senate, to give them the gavel. And we know that Larry Hogan is going to give them the gavel because he said so himself. He was asked if he would caucus with the Senate Republicans. And his answer was, of course. I'm a lifelong Republican. That's a quote. Larry Hogan says, of course I will caucus with the Senate Republicans. I'm a lifelong Republican. What that means, and it needs to be very clear to Maryland voters, is that the very first vote that Larry Hogan will cast will determine control of the United States Senate. And he has said on his very first vote, he will put Mitch McConnell and Ted Cruz and Lindsey Graham in charge. Once you do that, once you hand over the gavel to the Republicans, they get to set their agenda, their MAGA agenda, and they get to block a Democratic agenda. And we know Marylanders don't want that to happen. It's just important that Marylanders understand that if they vote for Larry Hogan, that's exactly what will happen going forward. This is why the NRSC, which is the political arm of Senate Republicans, is spending money to elect Larry Hogan, because they want him in their caucus, as he said he would be, and then they want him to cast that very first vote for MAGA Republicans and Republican leadership in the Senate. And he has said he would do that. So, of course, they're spending money. And that is also why you see other Senate Republicans hosting fundraisers right now for Larry Hogan, including when he went down to Tennessee to do a fundraiser with Senator Marsha Blackburn. You know, Marsha Blackburn is one of the leaders of the anti-abortion effort in the Senate. She's one of the leaders to effectively ban the right to abortion nationwide. She knows how important it is to get Larry Hogan in the Republican caucus. That's why all the Republicans in that caucus are excited about Larry Hogan running for Senate. And, you know, in case you don't know the full impact of it, in addition to the legislation, there are, of course, the judges, right? The Senate votes to confirm judges. And here's what Larry Hogan said about Donald Trump's selection for judges. He said, they're incredible justices. That's a quote. Larry Hogan statement about the Trump appointed justices, incredible justices. And what's very revealing is he said that after they voted to overturn Roe v. Wade. So look, we see a lot of election year conversion in terms of Larry Hogan's positions. But the bottom line is he has made crystal clear that he will caucus with the Senate Republicans if he won. And what that means, I just want to make sure everyone understands what that means. It means he is committed to cast his very first vote for Republican leadership. And when you have a Senate that it's essentially at 50-50, that means Larry Hogan's first vote will be to give the MAGA Republicans, Mitch McConnell, Ted Cruz, the gavel. Just to give you an example of how consequential these votes can be in a divided Senate, there were many occasions when the Senate deadlocked at 50-50 during the first 2 years of the Biden-Harris administration. And Vice President Harris would come to the Senate and cast the tie-breaking vote in favor of very important legislation and judges. Tie-breaking vote in favor of the Inflation Reduction Act, for example. So if we're going to have a 50-50 Senate, in order to get to 50-50, we need to make sure that Angela Alsobrooks wins this race. And that is why, in addition to her great record as a Prince George's County executive, a great record that she will also apply statewide, it's important that voters understand that a vote for Larry Hogan is a vote to put MAGA Republicans in charge, and a vote for Angela Alsobrooks will allow us to work with President Kamala Harris, Vice President Tim Walz, to enact a forward-looking agenda. And so that's why we need to make sure we elect Angela Alsobrooks and defeat Larry Hogan. And I'm really pleased that we're here with Congressman Ivey. I see Congressman Raskin. We also need, of course, to win a majority in the House. But I'm going to turn it over. I don't know if I'm turning it over to you, Glenn, or Jamie, but it's good to have all of you here. I'll just leave it up.
Okay. Jamie, if you wouldn't mind, I've got to hike over. I'm off campus, so if I could go next,
please.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm here to talk about the gun violence prevention aspect of this and Larry Hogan's record on that front. As you may recall, I was the state's attorney for Prince George's County. Fighting gun violence in Prince George's was a primary focus of mine, and my successor was Angela Alsobrooks. She continued that fight. We helped to bring down violent crime over that stretch by dramatic numbers to really all-time lows and for decades prior to that. And we want to continue that work. I've continued to do that here in Congress as my colleagues have as well. But I want to talk a minute about Larry Hogan's record on that front, because it's deeply problematic and goes against the grain for what I think the people of Maryland have in mind. In 2020, then Governor Hogan vetoed a bill to require background checks on private gun sales and transfers of rifles and shotguns. The legislature had to override his veto in the following year. On top of that, Hogan campaigned against Maryland's ban on assault weapons and high-capacity magazine, and that was legislation that was passed right after the Sandy Hook massacre, where 26 people were killed. 20 of the victims were under the age of 7, but he still opposed the assault weapons ban in Maryland. And then in 2022, he vetoed a bill to require firearm sellers to have greater security features on their stores in order to reduce the amount of gun sales illegally based on the theft of these guns from gun stores. And then finally, and it's just the last point I want to make on this front too, he refused to sign legislation banning ghost guns. And that was in 2022. He allowed the legislation to ban the guns to go forward, but he refused to sign the bill. And so I think it's pretty clear. Let's focus quickly on ghost guns. Ghost guns are guns that don't have serial numbers. And even gun owners across the country understand that we should ban those, because the only reason to not have a serial number on a gun is just so law enforcement can't track down criminals who've used the guns for illegal activities. Doesn't make any sense, but that's not a bill that he would sign. And that's a bill that we've got a variation of that pending in the House right now, has 160 Democratic co-sponsors. We've got 0 Republican co-sponsors. Larry Hogan's going to be on the side of the Republicans on that if he gets here. Same thing with the assault weapons issue. I've got a bill that would raise the age to get assault style weapons from 18 to 21. It's already 21 for handguns. We've got 160 plus co-sponsors in the House. We have 0 Republicans. Larry Hogan's going to be on the side of the 0 Republicans, refusing to move that forward. And then just finally, just to tap into the point that Chris made about the Supreme Court, one of the most damaging things that's happened with respect to reducing gun violence, to the fight against this epidemic of school shootings and the like that we've got, was the Supreme Court ruling called Bruin from 2 years ago. And that basically created new law. I remember the Republicans used to rail against, judicial fiat and legislators in black robes. Well, now that's exactly what they've got, and they're happy about it too. Not just with respect to overturning Roe, but overturning the constitutional standards that had been in place to protect common sense gun laws, like the one that was overturned. It was a licensing requirement in the state of New York that was over a century old. And now we've seen a ripple effect of those challenges happening across the country, frequently sponsored by Republican deep pockets to sort of try and overturn even the most basic and sensible gun restrictions that we've got in the country. So a vote for Larry Hogan would be a vote for more of the same on that front. We need Angela Alsobrooks in office to address the gun violence problem and be on the right side of this issue so that we can work to try and get more sensible gun laws in place to try and protect our school kids. I like to say that, I respect the Second Amendment, but I think it's also important for us to protect second graders. We need Angela Alsobrooks to help us do that. And with that, I will pass it over to our esteemed Congressman Jamie Raskin to take it from there.
Glenn, thank you very much. And I want to thank you and Senator Van Hollen for spelling it out so clearly. I got to thank my beloved friend, Attorney General Brian Frosh, for speaking up so forcefully and clearly and setting the record straight on a whole host of these issues. Because when Trump became president, Governor Hogan stood in the way of Maryland taking a strong stand against a whole series of things he was doing. And it was Brian Frosh who insisted that the General Assembly change the law so the Attorney General of the state could actually go forward and sue Donald Trump and the federal government for interfering with the rights and the liberties and the freedoms of the people of Maryland. And that was not Larry Hogan. Everybody remembers that was Attorney General Brian Frosh who did that. Looking forward, look, people have to remember that we're living in a time of extremely narrow margins, right? The Senate is on a knife's edge. It could be 50-50, 51-49. Nobody thinks it could get any bigger than 52-48. Every single vote counts. And it's the same thing in the House of Representatives, where we've seen extremely tight margins. We're trying to overtake the Republicans by switching at least 4 seats, but every single seat counts. Maryland is the powerhouse anchor of Democratic politics in America, and we cannot fool around with this situation. Not only would putting the Republicans in charge be the first vote that Larry Hogan casts, as Senator Van Hollen says, it will be the most important vote. In essence, it determines everything else that's going to happen after that. Everybody knows when you get elected to the U.S. Senate or the U.S. House or the State House or the State Senate, the key vote you cast is, are you going to put the Democrats in control of the agenda, or are you going to put the Republicans in control of the agenda? If you put the Democrats in control of the agenda in the U.S. Senate, we're talking about restoring Roe versus Wade, the fundamental constitutional right that women had for more than a half century before Donald Trump stacked and packed and gerrymandered the Supreme Court with the justices that Larry Hogan calls incredible justices, right? And so what we're talking about here is, are you going to vote to put the Republicans in charge of advising and consenting to justices in the Senate, or the Democrats in charge? Are you going to put, the Democrats in charge in the House for universal violent criminal background check, for red flag laws, for a ban on assault weapons, or are you going to put the Republicans in charge? We've seen exactly what they do on gun violence. Nothing, absolutely nothing, other than try to deregulate further. So that's the key thing. You can discover when you're in your late 60s, you're pro-choice. You could call yourself a liberal, a radical, a conservative, a moderate, whatever. It doesn't make any difference. What matters is, who are you voting to put in charge of the agenda? And we know exactly what the GOP agenda is. It is the Trump agenda. That's who's going to be controlling the gavels. So it's not as if Maryland is going to be electing the majority leader directly. The people of Maryland are going to be electing a U.S. senator who's either going to be voting to put the Democrats in control of the agenda, or they're going to be voting to put Ted Cruz or Josh Hawley, or I don't know, Senator Van Hollen might have a better sense of specifically who, but I guarantee you it's going to be someone who is going to be advancing the Donald Trump agenda. He has meticulous, absolute control over what the Republican Party does. And I saw that when I went over as the lead impeachment manager. The Mitch McConnell refused to do the right thing. He stuck with Donald Trump, and this is why we're in the situation we're in today. So I appreciate the fact that Brian Frosh has blown the whistle on this deception. Okay, we know exactly what is going to happen if we were to have Larry Hogan in office. And in fact, he laughed about it when he was asked, since he's trying to position himself somewhere between the Democratic and Republican parties, whether he would caucus with the Democrats or Republicans. And he just laughed about it. And he said, of course, the Republicans. In other words, of course, he's going to cast that decisive vote on the first day to put the Republicans in control of the national policy agenda. And I want to thank my colleagues for refocusing everybody on that basic reality. And I'm happy to yield back at this point. I don't know if it's to Senator Van Hollen or to Attorney General Frosh.
Thank you so much, Congressman Raskin and Senator Van Hollen and Attorney General Brian Frosh. We have a couple of minutes left for questions. If folks want to raise their hands, and then I can unmute you. I know that we are going to lose Representative Raskin soon for votes. So please raise your hands and I will call on folks if we have any questions. All right, it doesn't seem like we have questions. All right. Thanks, everyone.